The moment I saw that oversized white SUV blocking my driveway, I knew exactly who it belonged to. No one else in the neighborhood had the gall or the chrome-plated license plate frame that read HOA Queen Bee. It was Meredith. Meredith Langford. Middle-aged, bleach-blonde bob, always wearing a pastel pantsuit like she was running a fake HOA-themed TED talk. And of course, she was on the HOA board. Correction, she ran it like a dictatorship. I'm Zayden Pierce. 36, ER nurse, and the only guy on this street who refuses to bow to the HOA's petty tyranny. I bought this house for peace and space, not to be micromanaged by a woman who thinks she owns the sidewalk. This morning, I had just pulled a double shift. I was groggy, hungry, and ready to crash when I turned onto my street and saw her SUV straddling my driveway like it paid rent. I slowed down, blinked, and then laughed out loud in disbelief. She was standing there in her ridiculous wedge heels, chatting with another board member, sipping iced coffee like she hadn't just committed vehicular trespass. I rolled down my window. "Meredith, move your car." She barely glanced at me. "Zayden, this is a public street. I'm allowed to park wherever I want." "That's not a public driveway, that's my driveway," I said, pointing. She waved her hand like I was a fly. "You've been reported for excessive lawn growth. We're doing a visual inspection." I looked at my lawn. It was mowed, neat, better than half the street. "You're blocking my driveway for an inspection that isn't even real. We're within our rights. It's HOA business." She smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. I put the car in park, got out, and took pictures of her SUV blocking my driveway, front to back. Plates, tires on the curb, the whole thing. She didn't even blink. "You're wasting your time," she said. "No tow company's gonna touch an HOA officer's vehicle." I didn't answer. Instead, I walked into my house, pulled up my city's parking violation codes, and made one phone call. 15 minutes later, the tow truck pulled up. Big, red, loud. Meredith saw it and stormed over. "What do you think you're doing? You can't do this." The driver didn't even flinch. "Vehicles blocking a private driveway, that's a violation of city code." "Got the photo evidence and a homeowner complaint." "I'm on the HOA board." "Then you should know better," he said, hooking the chains under her front bumper. "You're going to regret this, Zayden," she hissed at me. I crossed my arms. "Not as much as you're going to regret parking like a tyrant." The SUV was gone in under 15 minutes, and the silence she left behind. Beautiful. HOA story, HOA stories, Homie Owners Association stories. 2 days passed without a peep from Meredith. Not a note, not a knock. Not even one of those obnoxious yellow HOA warning slips she usually left tucked in door frames like she was delivering subpoenas. I figured the tow truck incident had finally made her realize I wasn't someone she could push around. That fantasy ended Saturday morning. I was repairing a leaky faucet in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a rag and opened the door to find a man in a blue polo shirt, clipboard in hand, and a laminated badge clipped to his belt that read Compliance Officer Westbrook Hills HOA. He looked barely over 20. "You Zayden Pierce?" he asked, not meeting my eyes. "Yeah, what's this about?" He handed me a folded sheet of paper. "You've been issued a formal citation for non-compliant landscaping, unauthorized exterior modifications, and obstructing HOA procedures. You have 7 days to correct the violations or face fines." I read the paper. The citations were laughable. One claimed I had overgrowth exceeding 2 inches on the southern lawn perimeter. Another accused me of installing unapproved outdoor lighting structures. I pointed to the line about the lights. "These were already here when I bought the place," he shrugged. "I just deliver the notices, man." "Who filed the report?" "I'm not supposed to say." "You don't have to, I already know," he stiffened. "If you want to dispute the citations, the hearing's been scheduled for next Thursday at the HOA office." "What hearing?" "It's in the letter." Sure enough, buried in the fine print was a line about an internal review board that would reassess community compliance through a disciplinary meeting. I watched him walk back to a white sedan idling at the curb. Meredith sat in the passenger seat, sunglasses on, sipping from a metal tumbler that definitely wasn't filled with coffee. She didn't even look in my direction as they drove off. I closed the door and sat at the kitchen table, rereading the so-called violations. Internal hearing. Disciplinary board. Sounded more like a kangaroo court than anything legal. I pulled out the HOA bylaws I'd requested during escrow. As I flipped through the thick binder, I found a clause buried deep in Section 12. Any hearing to enforce compliance must be preceded by written notice detailing specific complaints, witness statements, and an opportunity for the accused to present evidence. That hadn't happened. They were bluffing. I spent the next 3 hours gathering evidence timestamps from my security cameras, the inspection report from the house's sale, and photos of the yard taken just last week. I even pulled up archived listings that showed the same outdoor lights in place 5 years ago. Then I made a few calls, one to the city's planning and zoning department, another to the neighbor diagonally across the street, Carla, who used to work as a paralegal and had once successfully sued a different HOA over misuse of funds. By Wednesday, word had started to spread. Carla had printed out flyers titled "Know Your Rights, HOA Abuse in Westbrook Hills," and quietly slipped them into mailboxes up and down the block. People started knocking on my door. A retired Navy mechanic, a single mom with 3 kids. A couple who just moved in and were already hit with a $500 fine for excessive Halloween decorations. The stories were all the same: selective enforcement, made-up violations, and Meredith's name attached to every complaint. Thursday came fast. The so-called hearing took place at the HOA office, a converted model home with fake plants and a fridge full of off-brand sparkling water. I arrived with a folder full of documents, 2 neighbors who'd agreed to testify, and my phone recording audio perfectly legal in our state as long as one party consents. The board consisted of 3 people, Meredith, naturally, plus 2 others I recognized from the neighborhood but had never spoken to. One was a retired dentist, the other worked in insurance. "We'll begin this proceeding now," Meredith said, clicking a pen and leaning forward. "Mr. Pierce, you've been cited for multiple violations. Do you accept responsibility?" "No," I said, placing the folder on the table. "And this hearing violates your own bylaws," she frowned. "Excuse me?" I opened the binder and flipped to Section 12. "You didn't provide any witness statements. No photographic evidence from the HOA. No prior written notice of a hearing. This meeting isn't just illegitimate, it's illegal under your own governance." One of the board members leaned over to read the section. The other looked visibly uncomfortable. I kept going. "Furthermore, the citation for outdoor lighting is invalid. These fixtures have been in place since before I bought the property. I have archived real estate listings and inspection reports to prove it. As for the landscaping complaint, I have time-stamped footage from the last 2 weeks showing regular maintenance." Meredith cut in. "This isn't a courtroom, Mr. Pierce. We're not required to follow legal standards." "That's where you're wrong," I said. "The HOA operates under state law, which means due process applies." She started to speak again, but I handed her a printed notice. "This is an official complaint I've filed with the Department of Consumer Protection. Any fines you attempt to issue will be considered retaliatory and added to the case." The room was dead silent. The dentist cleared his throat. "Maybe we should table this for now." Meredith's jaw clenched so tight I thought her molars might crack. "This doesn't mean you're off the hook," she said. I leaned forward. "Actually, it means I just started digging." I stood up, collected my folder, and left. That night, I received an anonymous message through my door. No envelope. Just a single sheet of paper listing HOA expenses for the last fiscal year. One line stood out. "Consulting fee $4,200 Langford Solutions, LLC." I stared at it for a long time. There was no public mention of any consulting firm in the HOA minutes. No contract posted online. Just a payment made to a company that shared Meredith's last name. The next morning, I drove downtown and filed a Freedom of Information request with the city clerk's office. If the HOA had submitted any permits, payments, or contracts through the city, I'd find them there. I also contacted a local investigative reporter who'd covered HOA corruption 2 years ago in a neighboring district. She didn't hesitate. "When can I come by?" she asked. "Tomorrow," I said. "Bring a microphone." By Friday evening, Meredith's SUV was back, but this time, parked legally. I watched from the porch as she walked up to my mailbox, looked around, and slipped something inside. I waited until she left, then opened it. A handwritten note in all caps, "You're making a big mistake." I folded it neatly and added it to the growing file in my kitchen drawer labeled Evidence HOA Abuse. I had no intention of backing down. By Monday morning, my living room had turned into a command center. The reporter, Julia Morneau, had arrived just after dawn with her camera crew and a voice recorder the size of a brick. She was sharp, early 30s, with a crisp blazer and a manner that told you she'd made more than one bureaucrat sweat on live television. She set her equipment on my dining table and scanned the documents I'd laid out: payment records, HOA bylaws, the letter with the veiled threat, and the anonymous expense list that had mysteriously appeared in my mailbox. Her eyes paused on the payment to Langford Solutions LLC. "You're sure this company belongs to Meredith?" she asked, flipping to the back of the page. "It's registered under the same address as her tax records." I cross-checked it with the county assessor's office. Julia nodded, impressed. "You've done your homework. Too many people on this street are afraid of her," I said. "They think she'll bury them in fines if they speak up. I want to do more than fight back. I want to shut her whole operation down." Julia adjusted the lapel mic and gestured for me to sit. "Then let's start with how she blocked your driveway. That's the kind of visual people understand." By noon, she had her story. Footage of Meredith's SUV boxed across the concrete, my security cam clips, the tow truck, the phony violations. And then the real bombshell, the payment to Langford Solutions LLC with no public record of what that consulting work entailed. "I'm going to pitch this as a misuse of HOA funds," Julia said, packing up. "But if you're right and she's laundering money through a fake company, then we're looking at fraud. Maybe worse." I walked her out, heart pounding. I hadn't said the word out loud before, fraud. That night I didn't sleep. Not from nerves, but because I was digging through every digital trace I could find. I looked up every meeting minute posted to the HOA website, cross-referenced every line item in the publicly available budget reports. And I found something: a discrepancy between what was reported online and what had been anonymously slipped into my hands. Over $15,000 in consulting fees stretched across 2 years, none of which appeared in the official financial summaries. I made a copy. The next morning, I brought it to the local precinct. Detective Rena Caldwell met me in a small, windowless room at the back of the station. She wore a loose gray cardigan over a shoulder holster and didn't bother with pleasantries. "You're saying your HOA president is falsifying budget reports to siphon off money into a dummy company she owns?" she asked, flipping through the pages. "Not president," I said. "Board chair. She runs the place, but technically she's just a committee head." Caldwell nodded. "Still, HOA board members are fiduciaries. If she's moving funds without disclosure or approval, that's embezzlement. If the company doesn't do any real work, it's also wire fraud." "She's not alone," I added. 2 other board members signed off on the budget. "I think they're covering for her." Caldwell leaned back, arms crossed. "You willing to testify if this goes to court?" "I'll do more than that," I said. "I'll make sure half the neighborhood lines up behind me." She opened a manila folder and pulled out a form. "Leave copies of everything. We'll open an investigation. If there's anything else you find, call me directly." When I got home, my phone buzzed with 6 unread messages, 3 from neighbors, 1 from Carla, 2 from numbers I didn't recognize. Julia's story had aired. I opened the first message. "You're not going to believe this. Meredith just called an emergency HOA meeting. She's trying to push through a motion to increase monthly dues by 20%. Claims it's to cover legal costs. You coming?" I grabbed my keys. The emergency meeting was held in the same model home turned HOA office, but this time the mood was different. Tense. The folding chairs were filled with residents I'd never seen at any previous meeting. One man stood in the back with his arms crossed, glaring at the board. A woman rocked a stroller with one hand while clutching the agenda in the other. Meredith stood at the front, flanked by her two loyalists. Her hair was pulled back tight and her voice echoed across the room. "We are facing a coordinated attack on our neighborhood's integrity," she said. "Outside media and hostile elements are threatening to destabilize our community. This proposed increase in dues is a temporary measure to ensure we can retain proper legal protection while we investigate the individuals responsible." I raised my hand. She didn't call on me, so I stood up. "This isn't about protecting the neighborhood. It's about covering your tracks. You used HOA funds to pay your own company. That's illegal." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Meredith glared at me. "You don't understand the complexities of board management. All expenses were approved by a majority vote." "Funny," I said, holding up a printed budget report, "because none of those expenses show up in the official reports. You doctored the public record." Her voice rose. "This meeting is not a trial. Any accusations of criminal activity will be dealt with through appropriate legal channels." "They already are," I said. "I filed a complaint with the police, so did others. There's an active investigation." "You might want to call your lawyer." One of the board members leaned toward her and whispered something. She stiffened. A hand shot up near the back of the room. It was Carla. "Motion to suspend the board until an independent audit can be completed," she said. "I nominate Zayden to serve as interim oversight until then." Another hand went up, then another. Meredith tried to interject, but the crowd wasn't listening. The tide had turned. People weren't afraid anymore. They were angry. A vote was called. Hands rose. Only Meredith and her two allies voted against it. When it was over, I stood at the front, heart racing, unsure what to say. But before I could speak, a man in a collared shirt stepped forward from the doorway. He held up a badge. "Detective Caldwell," he said. "I need to speak with Meredith Langford and board members Price and Donnelly. We have a warrant to seize financial records and electronic devices associated with the HOA." Gasps echoed around the room. Meredith turned white. "You can't do this in the middle of a meeting," Caldwell raised an eyebrow. "Actually, this is the best time. We'd hate to see any documents go missing." The officers moved in, collecting laptops, binders, and Meredith's tablet. One of them pulled open a locked cabinet and retrieved a stack of folders labeled vendor contracts. The room was silent as Meredith and her cronies were escorted to the exit. No handcuffs, not yet, but their faces were pale and their eyes refused to meet anyone's. Caldwell paused at the door and looked at me. "Keep your neighbors organized. This isn't over yet." When the room finally emptied, Carla walked up to me. "You didn't just stand up to her," she said. "You cracked the whole thing wide open." I nodded, still dazed. "We've got a lot to fix." "Maybe," she said, "but at least now we get to do it without someone parking an SUV across your rights." Outside, the neighborhood felt different, lighter somehow. People stood in their driveways talking, comparing notes, trading stories they'd never had the courage to share before. And for the first time since moving in, I felt like I wasn't just surviving in this neighborhood. I was helping rebuild it. 3 weeks passed. The Westbrook Hills HOA office stayed shuttered, its windows dark, the oversized sign removed by order of the city pending investigation. Meredith's name had vanished from the neighborhood directory, and her house sat unusually quiet. No weekend brunches, no committee meetings, no parade of clipboard-toting followers. Just drawn blinds and a for sale sign that appeared overnight, staked neatly between her hydrangeas like she was trying to leave without catching anyone's eye. But the damage had already been done, and not just to her reputation. Detective Caldwell's investigation had widened after seizing the HOA's records. The Forensic Accounting Unit traced a series of payments funneled through Meredith's LLC that didn't just involve consulting services. There were invoices for landscaping that had never been performed, security patrols that didn't exist, and even a fake maintenance contractor registered under a P.O. box in a neighboring county. That contractor, according to the state's business registry, was managed under the name of her second cousin. When I sat down with Caldwell again, she didn't sugarcoat it. "We're looking at a web of financial misrepresentation going back 5 years," she said. She wasn't just charging residents for made-up violations. She was siphoning those fines into her own accounts. "How much?" I asked. "Preliminary estimate is close to $230,000. We're still digging." I let that number sink in. "And the board members, 2 of them cut deals. They're cooperating. Looks like they signed off on budgets without reading the fine print. Sloppy, but not criminal unless we find proof they were getting payouts too." The real break came when one of the cooperating board members, Donnelly, turned over a flash drive he'd kept just in case. It contained internal emails, hundreds of them, between Meredith and her cousin, discussing how to spread out charges across resident statements so no one would notice the fees. One stood out. It read, "As long as no one starts digging, we're safe. Keep Zayden busy. Make up some fines if you have to." Caldwell handed me a sanitized copy of that email. I didn't say anything for a long time. That week, the district attorney's office filed formal charges: wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud, misappropriation of funds, and obstruction of justice. Meredith was arrested at her home early Tuesday morning, bundled into the back of a cruiser in her robe and slippers, trying to shield her face from a local news crew that had parked across the street. I watched from my porch, coffee in hand. For once, she didn't have anything to say. The aftermath was messy but necessary. The city appointed a temporary mediator to oversee the HOA's operations. Residents voted to dissolve the existing board and draft a new charter with strict transparency clauses and rotating leadership. No one would be allowed to serve more than 2 terms. Carla was elected to chair the new board, and she immediately pushed for an independent audit firm to handle the books going forward. We also voted to lower HOA dues for the next year, since we discovered a sizable chunk of the budget had been hoarded in a legal contingency fund Meredith had created for emergencies. It turned out the only emergency had been getting caught. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in the newly reopened community center, now free of the fake plants and motivational posters Meredith had installed. Carla was at the whiteboard with a marker outlining ideas for a neighborhood improvements grant. "We've got almost 12,000 left from recovered funds," she said. "I'm thinking we let residents pitch small projects and vote on them. Garden beds, lighting upgrades, maybe a book sharing station on the corner." "Just no pastel birdhouses," I said. She laughed. "Deal." Behind us, the room buzzed with conversation. Neighbors who'd barely spoken before were now trading stories, planning cleanup days, and organizing a block party to celebrate the community's reset. People had come out of their shells, not just to air grievances, but to rebuild trust. Later that evening, I walked the length of my street. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the sidewalks. Mailboxes had fresh paint. Lawns were tidy but not obsessively uniform. A group of kids zipped past on scooters, laughing. Outside my driveway, an old man I hadn't spoken to before waved me over. "You're Zayden, right?" he asked, leaning on his cane. "That's me," I said. "I heard what you did. The way you stood up to her, just wanted to say thanks. I've lived here 27 years and I thought it'd always be like that. You proved it doesn't have to be." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. The next week, I received a letter from the city attorney's office. As the original complainant and key witness, I'd be called to testify during Meredith's trial. The case had already drawn attention from state regulators, and there was talk of legislative reform, new requirements for financial disclosures from HOAs statewide. I met with the assistant district attorney preparing the case. She was calm, methodical, and already had a binder 2 inches thick. "We're going to make an example out of this one," she said. "Not just because of what she did, but because of how long she got away with it. Your documentation made this possible." At the trial, Meredith sat at the defense table, pale and silent. She didn't look at me as I took the stand. I detailed everything: the driveway incident, the phony violations, the retaliatory hearing, and the forged budget reports. The prosecutor walked the jury through a timeline of deceit, complete with email transcripts and financial statements. It didn't take long. The jury returned a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in prison with eligibility for parole after 4. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the HOA and barred from serving on any residential board again. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I gave one statement: this wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. No one should be afraid to live in their own home. I never saw Meredith again. A few months later, the neighborhood threw its first real block party. No speeches, no dress codes, just potluck tables, string lights, and music from someone's Bluetooth speaker. Kids ran barefoot on the grass. Retirees danced under the street lamps. The air smelled like barbecue and fresh beginnings. Carla raised a plastic cup in my direction. To the guy who got the SUV towed and the tyrant toppled, I laughed. All I wanted was my driveway back. "You got a lot more than that," she said. She was right. What started with a blocked driveway had turned into something bigger: proof that standing up, even when you're alone, can change everything. Not just for yourself, but for everyone watching from the sidelines, waiting for a reason to believe they can do it too. And for the first time since moving into Westbrook Hills, I didn't feel like just another homeowner. I felt like part of a neighborhood.